Joseph, you're a big investor in a lot of the periphery countries, some of the yields that actually are, I guess, attractive, but you need to have a good appetite to try and get through them. Where do you see value in Europe right now?
Well, it's value in the stock market. I mean, most of the southern European stock markets look very cheap, and they look even cheaper now that you've seen your major compression in those yields that you just mentioned. Greece has gone from a sort of has had a staggering race from 8% yield to less than 2.5% now. It's probably been one of the best performers in terms of yields, and as a consequence of that, I think the stock market is due for a big bounce. It's done very well this year. I mean, it's probably one of the best performing stock markets up more than 30% this year. But there's still more way to go.
There are also elections in Greece, right? And we understand that actually, I guess the disenfranchised youth may turn to conservatives instead of what we have at the moment. Does that change your how you view Greece at all?
Well, it would. I think what's interesting about Greece is if on July 7th, Mitsotakis' New Democracy, i.e. sort of more of a mainstream political party, more of sort of a free market, pro-reforms party gets elected, then Greece will have been the first sort of southern European, and indeed the first European country to have gone through, the tunnel of populism and to have come out the other way. So in some ways, Greece is ahead of Europe from that standpoint. Italy may be next.
Yeah, except I guess the Greeks had a very clear referendum where they stayed in the euro. Can you say the same things of other countries? I know Italy cannot actually have a referendum on the euro, but does it worry you that some of these populist parties will actually become much more vocal in either having parallel currencies or parallel mini bots or something like that?
I'm not that worried about it, because I think what you've seen in Greece is actually the template for what's happening in the rest of Europe. Is that those populist parties are great in terms of, dealing with social networks, making opinion, even getting elected. But once they're elected, they kind of realize that the room for maneuver in terms of economic policy is not that great. So, as you mentioned, Tsipras went to his people. He said, do you want more austerity? They all said, they all gave a resounding no. And then he turned around and still had to deal with the EU and stayed in the euro and give them more austerity for 5 years. So I think that's why people are through with populism in Greece, and I think that's why people will be through with populism in the rest of Europe at some point.
Let me show you a share price of Atlantia in Italy over the last 5 years. Now, Italy's government, we understand today, took some preliminary steps towards a possible unilateral revocation of this motorway concession held by Autostrade per l'Italia. I mean, again, how do you view this? Like a unilateral concession, I know it was following the disaster in Genoa, but should it make investors a lot more nervous, or is it a good buying opportunity?
I think this is quite a tricky one, to be honest. We've been cautious on Atlantia since the disaster at the Ponte Morandi, and it's not something that I would have appetite to take on. I think there are some reasons. You've got to distinguish, the underlying case and the form. I think the underlying case is quite murky, in terms of revoking the concession, but there is a risk there, and there is some cause, and there are lots of issues with the Atlantia concession, and those issues go back, since the privatization in 1999. And so in some ways, the Italian government might have a point here. Unfortunately, the form with which the Italian government approaches the revocation of the concession is just awful. I mean, for the vice prime minister of the country to get on the tape while the stock market's open, while the shares that are listed are moving, and to say this company is cooked, as he did last week, I mean, that sends sort of shivers down investors' necks, and frankly, it sends a terrible signal about the Italian government dealing with business in general.
So what does it mean? I mean, where do you pick where you want to be, for example, in Italy?
Well, there are lots of utilities, if you like, utilities that don't carry those types of risks.
Yeah.
I don't think utilities are particularly attractive here. I mean, I think that I'd be sort of looking more at riskier bets in Italy. I think the banks look very, very oversold to me, and I'm not a big fan of the bank's fundamentals, but frankly, there's a price for everything, and they've cleaned up by and large, and I don't think Italy's going pear-shaped anytime soon. In fact, I think it's actually improving. I think people will be surprised by the numbers, the economic numbers this year. I think the tax receipts will be stronger than what people think. There won't be issues with Brussels in terms of them having to adjust their budget. So I actually think that there's a lot of good buys in that Italian market, from small caps to telecoms to banks and even some utilities.